we hack the cliches. Come to drop that beat, turn down to 5. Say what's dancing on your feet.
Hello, and welcome to Unconventional Wisdom, about conventional wisdom. I'm your host, Kim Miller-Hershon. This is my guest, Jerry Brazie. He has such an interesting story. I know that you are just going to love hearing from him today. And so let me just tell you quickly a little bit about him. So he is an entrepreneur who has built, bought, and sold more than a dozen businesses, and they have generated north of $450 million in revenue. And what is, I think, particularly interesting about Jerry is that he was raised in really abject poverty as number 7 of 9 kids. He faced some very difficult circumstances, and he started with nothing. He had no degrees, no safety net, and he has built, bought, and sold those businesses responsible for generating all that revenue. I know that today he is going to have some absolute incredible wisdom about what his expectations were when he was growing up and when he started to where he is now. Jerry, let's start with your random question. All right. So when we were talking before, I learned a lot of interesting things about you. But your random question actually has to do with playing pool. So tell us a little bit about how you got into it and what it means to you.
It's really an interesting story. When I was 13 years old, my older sister, she was 7 years older than me. She died on the eve of her 21st birthday.
Oh, wow.
Trying to deal with that kind of trauma, my parents picked up and moved to Montana for a year and opened a little pizza restaurant with another group of people. And I found myself living in Montana in the wintertime from Portland, Oregon, dealing with 20 degrees below temperatures and my nose freezing shut with absolutely nothing to do in a little town called Gardner, Montana. And it was 1 block long, and there were 7 bars on that 1 block. And so in summertime, there was all kinds of things to do. In the wintertime, there was nothing to do. And so they would let me into the bars as a 14-year-old, and I would play pool. And that was my first introduction to pool. I was only there for about 8 months. I moved back to Portland, Oregon, where I was raised, and just started to play pool more and more, as much as hanging out in pool halls because they were open 24 hours as it was anything. And so over the next 5 or 6 years, I played a whole lot of pool, got away from it. I had kids, I got married, I had my career, all of those things. And then as my kids got older, and I couldn't go play basketball anymore, and I started getting into my 50s, I picked pool back up. And so this is my 7th year of playing pool. I'm 57. I started playing when I was 50, and now it's therapy, if you will. I'll play 3-4 days a week, go play sometimes 6-7 hours on some Fridays and Saturday nights.
Wow.
Yeah.
So are you a hustler?
The guys would like me to be, but I don't gamble at all. I never have. I work too hard for my money. So I always look at it that way. And if we were to tell my story, I have 6 older brothers and sisters, but there were 7 years between me and my next oldest sister, who was the youngest. And so I got to see as they got pregnant and went to jail and all of those things. I got to watch that. I didn't avoid all of those things, but I noticed that smoking led to drinking, and I saw what they did, so I never smoked. And then drinking led to drugs, so I never drank. And then drugs led to gambling and bad decisions in prisons. And so I never did drugs. I didn't avoid some of those pieces, but as I grew up, I said, you know what, I'm not going to do anything. So I'm one of those guys that has never smoked, doesn't drink, doesn't do drugs, and I don't gamble.
There you go. And you're a fun guy anyway, right?
I think so.
A testament to just having a good personality.
Yeah, I'm high on life is really my answer. That's really the key. And I also embrace all of the things that maybe you want to try to forget. I'm not controlled by any of those things. And I never had the need to go temper those memories type of a thing.
Which in and of itself is actually pretty extraordinary. To be able to say, you can talk about your past and the things that have happened to you. And like you said, you're not controlled by them, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I had an epiphany. I'll tell a quick story that brought me where I am in life. I was 14 years old. As I said, my older sister had just died about 4 months previous in December, and I went blind in my right eye. And so I'm 14 months old, and then I have surgery to save my left eye. which they were able to save the vision in my left eye. But now I'm blind. Now it's August, and I catch myself taking some money out of a bank in Southeast Portland, and I got robbed. 4 guys got me. I didn't see them. I was a street kid. I knew how these things work, and I wasn't paying attention. And they put it to me pretty good, broke a couple of ribs, broke my nose, rolled me underneath a bus stop. At the time, I thought they stole everything. As I got older, I realized they really took nothing because I'm still here and I'm still alive. And so they rolled me under there. I wake up a couple hours later under the bus stop, and I take the bus home, and I have a 1.5 mile walk in Portland, Oregon, and the square in the ground is still there today as I'm doing this 1.5 mile walk. Now remember, both eyes are black, I'm bleeding down my front, my nose is broken, my ribs are broken, and a voice says to me from behind me, so clearly that I thought it was somebody in the duplex yelling at me. And again, I go 1 week out of the month back to Portland, and about every 3rd month, I go back to that spot and I stand there because the square in the sidewalk is double sized, and it still is all these years later. But I thought somebody was yelling at me, so much so that I turned. And Kim, on my children's eyes, a voice said to me outside my head, everything is your fault. I was like, wait, I don't know if it was God, Buddha, I don't know, Jiminy Cricket, my conscience, I don't know what it was, but it was outside of my head and it said, everything is your fault. And I argued with it once I realized someone wasn't yelling at me. And I said, that's not my fault. It said, everything you do going forward is your responsibility, or you're going to be like everyone else. I didn't have a pastor. I didn't have anybody telling me, a mentor. I didn't have a counselor. I didn't have anything. I was a street kid. And yet here was this voice telling me this. I'd like to say that it was a hockey stick, but it wasn't, but it stuck with me. And that voice that said, everything is your fault. Everything is your responsibility. And as I grew up and I got older and I went through all of these experiences, it's probably been the singular superpower that I have is that I take responsibility for everything that happens to me in my life. So I've had people steal and or lose me hundreds of thousands of dollars. And rather than get pissed off at them, I always looked at what could I do differently? How did I put them in a position that gave them access to those things? Now, if they need to be fired or dealt with or whatever, it's just an honest mistake, whatever it was, I find a whole lot more power in not giving that power to others, but keeping it to myself, figuring out what I did wrong, and then changing it going forward. And so I think in a short 3-4 minute story there answers your question about where my ability to manage those things come from without having to resort to outside influences.
Well, I really love the idea of a lot of the stuff that happens to you is not in your control, but your experience of it and what you do with it is the only thing that is absolutely in your control. And I think that in and of itself is so powerful. And instead of sitting in self-pity or self-doubt or in worse, in making it, which is really what you just said, which is making it everybody else's fault. And therefore, you have no responsibility for anything, to be able to say, I am responsible for my own experience.
I think that is absolutely true. And even more so when you come from the poor background, the abject poverty that I came from. I say all the time, when I'm asked, Jerry, how did you just deal with all of the things? I mean, I've been shot at, beaten within an inch of my life. I've been stabbed with a 10-inch screwdriver and a mugging. I've had a life. And all of those things, I said, I am who I am in spite of where I come from and also because of it. Right. So the things that I went through that I survived, to me now, help me lean on over the last 25, 30 years as I've gone down this crazy entrepreneurial lifestyle, have allowed me to do things that were unimaginable to me because I survived the unimaginable. And so when you are poor in particular, everybody around you has the same mindset. And I'm out here to try to change that mindset, which is it's everyone else's fault. Because as soon as one person gets out, then all of a sudden you have to reassess. Maybe it's not where I was born, who I was born to, my grandparents, my teacher, my counselor, maybe the boss, maybe it's on me. And so your family, consciously and subconsciously, will try to pull you back. Your friends, your community, even your teachers and your counselors, they will try to hold you back from getting out of there, because if you do, it disrupts all of their excuses, really the basis of their lives, which is pointing in other directions. That never worked for me. I never ascribed to that. Again, when I was 17 years old, I was living with hookers and heroin addicts in a $25 a week flop house, and I had a full-time job. I had my first job at 11 years old. I paid taxes, and I've never looked back. So I just had this drive that said, I'm getting out of here. And getting out of here was just graduating from high school, maybe, which I never did. But ultimately, then I was able to graduate my children from high school.
There you go.
Yeah.
Congratulations to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Which also, maybe this is a subject for a different podcast, is the state of our education system and, what it means to be smart versus what it means to have a degree. Not necessarily the same thing.
I said this morning on X that I would take, there was some statistic had come out about people who are educated in their beliefs and people who aren't in their beliefs. And I said, I've hired 10,000 people over the last coming up on 30 years. I've never looked at where they went to school or what they graduated with. I will take street smarts and common sense over education any day. Now, if you take street smarts and common sense and you start to layer on top of that foundation with education and experience, now you're powerful. Now you have something. But education and smarts, for the sake of them, are, in my estimation, again, across all of the things that I've done, I've never seen it manifest itself.
Yeah. All right. That's actually a great segue into really the first kind of more formal question that I want to ask you, which is, so let me ask you the question and then I want to give you a little bit of context. So the question is, what is a piece of conventional business wisdom you followed early on, only to realize that it was later like completely wrong for you? And you're interesting because I don't know what expectations you actually had, right?
Yes.
Growing up, right? It's different potentially than somebody
Yes.
who grew up middle class or with money.
I had no perspective. Look, I bought a house when I was 20 years old because I read an article that said that you should buy a house. And so I paid 12.5% mortgage on an $87,000 house. I didn't know what an interest rate was. I didn't know what equity was. I didn't know what a mortgage was at 20 years old. I went to high school through 15, but I was street smart and I knew how numbers worked. And so I read the article. It made sense to me. So I bought a house. So when I say that I went into my first business at 28 years old, having some context of what to expect, I didn't have any. My eyes were, you know what? It was probably a superpower that I knew nothing, because I don't think anybody would ever become an entrepreneur or own a business if they had any context of what was,
Right.
or any concept, I should say, of what is about to take place for them. I would say loosely, just to answer your question, the first time I opened my first business, I went to Staples and I bought a briefcase because I'm 57 years old. And my whole life on television, everybody carried a briefcase. So if you're in business, now I've gone to jobs, I had worked all this time, but I never thought the need to carry a briefcase. But when I became an entrepreneur, barely understanding what that term meant, the first thing I did is went and bought a briefcase. So I'm probably going to be the only person that answers this question this way for you, which is that you don't need a briefcase.
Oh my, you have shattered me. Just shattered
I'm
me.
sure I have. Yeah.
But though, I think that all joking aside, that you're really bringing up, I think, actually, really a salient point around our expectations of the formality of that we have to dress a certain way and we have to look a certain way. Carrying a briefcase really gave the connotation of being legitimate. Now I am a business person. And I think in a lot of ways, the rise of tech maybe somewhat changed the norms around that. But I think for those of us who didn't grow up in the digital age, I think it's very much the expectation.
Yeah, I think that's fair. In fact, I came of age. This is a slight brag, but it'll tell the story. The first time I could afford like a supercar, I'm a big car guy and I always have been. So I'm the poor kid who had the cars on his wall. And the first time I could afford a real car, I went in shorts and a t-shirt because that's what I was wearing. I was running my company and I was operating it more than anything. So I was out in the warehouse working. And it was time to go buy a $160,000 car. And I went in shorts and a t-shirt because I never really cared what anybody ever thought about me. I wore a suit when I needed to go to a business meeting or whatever it was, but I'm at work and it was time to go buy the car. And this is just at the dawn of the internet, 2005, 2006. And they almost didn't believe that what I was there to do. And yet I drove off with that car. So I got just at the beginning of what you're talking about, where I was in front of that, where people look sideways at you. Now you don't know who has $1 billion.
That's right.
They don't look like the top hat and the spats like you and I grew up with.
Yeah. And I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. Shorts and a t-shirt are the norm. Like you really don't know who you're talking to.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. All right, cool. So in the introduction, I said that you've bought and sold a number of businesses, right? And you're very successful. What is one thing that you still wrestle with underneath it all? That people are like, oh, Jerry, he's got this.
Not just me, but I think all entrepreneurs. My latest startup is a peer-to-peer group, a mastermind peer-to-peer group for entrepreneurs, the Kronos Group.
Huh?
And one of the reasons I started that, I joined a group when I was 30 years old. My business was 2 years old, and I joined this group. I wouldn't be sitting here had I not joined the group. But to answer
Mm,
your question, the thing about the group is that what I learned is all of the things that I thought I was doing wrong and I'm the only one, everyone else is doing has the same struggles, right? Maybe not the specific problem, but
right.
this idea that everyone has it figured out and only you, the entrepreneur, are suffering or struggling or
Yeah.
having these issues is just not true. And when I got in the group, it was almost a relief that I was having these problems because I learned that the other people were having the same problems. Or, and this is the critical part about a group like the Kronos Group or the one that I joined, which is still together 25 years later, that they've gone through it and they can help me maybe go around it or wade through it not quite so deeply or miss some mistakes or avoid some mistakes, I should say, that they made and save me money. So in both of those contexts, I would say that in social media, this has been 25 years ago for me. Social media today, and 85% of the advice that I see on social media about business and startups and success is just not true in my experience. And I think that that has made it more difficult for entrepreneurs today because everything looks like it's 4 hours a week leaning against a Lamborghini and that's all the work you do, right? And the reality is 180 degrees the opposite of that.
Right.
And so in that context, just knowing that everyone struggles the same way I did was almost a relief. So that's what I would say.
I think you are really onto something here. I think the other thing is too about the kinds of groups that you're running. And honestly, we have different targets. I have online group coaching with a different, I think, focus than you do. But the thing is that you have to be brave enough to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? And I think that may be because you are somebody who doesn't hide his past, that may feel more natural to you. Or who knows, right? I think sometimes, like, we have this idea that everybody on the outside sees that you have made it. And so you can't actually say there's some pressure. There could be some internal pressure. Oh, like I can't say I don't have it all together because it looks like I do.
I think that yeah, years ago, a couple of brothers out of Los Angeles had a car shop that they were upgrading cars, Corvettes in particular, and they'd reached out to me to come do some consulting with them because they were running out of space and they were scared to move into a bigger space. And so I helped them on an hourly basis. And over the next year and a half, 2 years, not only did they move into a new, bigger space with more equipment, more employees, but they kept the old space for storage overflow. So we did very well. And it was two brothers. And one of them, after about a year and a half of doing this, comes to me in a call, the younger one. And he says, Jerry, I think at that point, this is 10 years ago, I was paying you $550 an hour for your help on this. And really, I'm finding it just, I never really asked you, and I find it hard to justify that. And I said, that's fine. That's no problem. And I get why you would ask that question. But here's what you have to do. You can go back first and live through my childhood. I mean, I have lost fortunes and I have made fortunes. I have built companies and I have lost companies. I've been up and down and everywhere in between. I've fought almost every kind of battle there is to fight in the entrepreneurial world. You can go do that for 25 years, or you can pay me $550 an hour and I can help you avoid all of those pitfalls. So, in that context, that's really how I approach that.
So smart. And the thing is that it's true, right?
Yes.
You're not telling a story, right? That is why people pay coaches, they join peer groups with somebody who is an expert. As a matter of fact, this is interesting. I'm going to say this and then I got a little story about it, which is I always tell people, you're going to get there because if you are somebody who was never going to get there, then I don't want to work with you. But just what you said, I can help you get there faster with less mistakes and with your head on straight. And what's really interesting is that my last, what I like to call my last job, I was doing some training. I worked for a training company and I was doing some training and I said something. We were actually teaching presentation skills. Okay. So how to speak in front of a group, right? And this was like a corporate group. And I said something similar to that. Listen, you're all going to figure it out eventually. You need to join our program so that you can figure it out now, right?
Hmm.
You know what's really interesting? I got called on the carpet for saying that,
Yeah.
right? They were like, that was such a big mistake. Like you told them that they don't need us. And I was like, no, that's not actually what I said at all. From my mind, if you're not coachable, then don't spend the money. Don't waste any of our times.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. In fact, my advice and one of the ways that I had lived my life is I worry very little about what I'm good at. I worry about what I'm not good at in the context of my life and business. So I worry about the things that can take my money, not the things necessarily. If it's making money and it's doing well, I go and look at it and I say, okay, what could I do better? What am I missing? What don't I know? And then I try to look for my blind spots. It's very hard to look for those blind spots. In particular, I'll tell you a great story real quick. My businesses were humming. My group was going great. Everything was fantastic. This has been, 12, 15 years ago. And I was the most money I was ever making. I just reached the mountain for me and was doing very well. And I was making about a couple of $100,000, $250,000 a month at the time. And I got approached to buy a business and it was a big acquisition. I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. And my group told me, I'm paraphrasing, a year worth of work. But the group said, no, it does make sense. Don't do it. And I, of course, because I was so high and mighty and I had crawled up off the streets and I was making all of this money, I had always had the shut up and listen mentality. But in this one, I got way over my skis. And that ended up costing me about $6 million in 5 years of my life. It's simply because I thought I couldn't quite understand the financials. I couldn't understand the business completely, but I thought, oh, I'll figure it out like I do everything else. In looking at that in hindsight and going back over that huge mistake to learn from it, I figured out that not only did it cost me 5 years of my life and $6 million, but the $250,000 a month I was making should have been $310,000. I was leaving $60,000 on the month. But Kim, I was making more money than I've ever seen in my life. I was buying all kinds of things and houses and cars, and I was buying other businesses and real estate, and I was expanding, and the empire was growing, and I was losing $60,000 a month while I was making $250,000. I stopped listening. I thought I knew everything. And the reality is that's when I needed the help most. So sometimes it's on the bottom end, but a lot of times it's on the top end. Actually, probably more often than not, it's on the top end every bit as much.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. So if you could rewrite the rule book on leadership, what's one thing that you'd throw away immediately and what would you replace it with?
So social media and television has been terrible about this. I say this on almost every podcast, anytime I get the opportunity to do it. That business is not these television shows where they build cars or they build motorcycles and everybody's throwing wrenches at each other and they're yelling and screaming and the boss comes in and says, we have a deadline and it's got to be done by now. And then he storms off and slams the door with the camera following him. That's not reality. That's not what business is. And I think that there's this idea. I don't know that it's in this rule book. There certainly was as I have grown up. And I don't know that social media has helped change this simply because scripted television shows and scripted videos seem to follow the same idea, which is that you have to be this over-the-top ogre in order to find success. Sports plays a huge part in telling the wrong story about success, yelling and screaming at referees and at each other, getting overexcited, and all of the things that go with our football and our basketball and our baseball do not translate to the real world. In my vast experience, I've just never seen where those Bobby Knight, for anybody our age knows about throwing at Indiana, he was the coach of basketball and throwing the chair across the floor at the referee and all that. And my whole approach to life was based on that aggressiveness that I saw in the sports world. Now I'm a street kid, so I'm already aggressive, but I took it to another degree because that's the people we saw every day. That's what they told us. And I learned very quickly that is a way to ruin a business, not grow a business. Business is already hard enough to do. It's already stacked against you to even begin when you start to not buy into those things that seem to make sense, in particular as it relates to sports, because we all feel like we're on an equal footing with those, because we could make the same call and we can make the same basket and we can always second guess the coach. And so there's almost a mindset about that we're inside of that as opposed to outside of that, having to live another world. Maybe that's why it does so well, because it's a great escapism. But I would say that from a leadership perspective, what we see in popular culture is not the way you run a business. Whether or not that's a rule book, I'm not sure, but it seems to be prevalent.
And I think it also really has to do with being congruent with who you are, right? I think that so often the rule book says that there's one way to be successful, right? There's one way to be a successful entrepreneur. There's one way to be a successful tech exec, right? There's one way to be a successful managing partner at a law firm, right? It feels like there's narrow lanes in those things. And you're right. I do think that social media and TV and streaming and all the things that we do now, they show a very particular way of being, even being a entrepreneur or being any kind of professional, right?
Sure.
Things like, right, some of these shows, which now I'm going to sound like a total dodo bird because I don't actually watch them. I don't know if it's Severance or these shows where they have the families pitted against each other, these very rich
Yes.
families. Maybe Severance isn't the right one. Don't hold me to that. Somebody can make a comment and tell me what show I'm talking about. But I think that you're right, that everybody has to be ruthless and everybody has to be pitted against each other. And that makes for good business and for good drama.
Yeah, I don't think that's reality at all. In fact, I teach all of the time that I can, and I have lived by this also, is change today what I changed yesterday if needed, and change tomorrow what I changed today. And so in order to be willing to do that, you got to set your emotion aside, because that takes an analytical ability. So many times you might spend 2 months implementing some program and it just doesn't work. So you got to, no, stop what you're doing, folks. Go back to what we were doing. Let's figure out what we did wrong, re-implement it later if we think it's going to make sense. Maybe we're just going down the wrong way completely, but so often people want to just double down on their mistakes because they want to defend this. I spent all this time, I spent all of this energy doing it, and it just does not, in the end, that never pencils. But to your point about there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, I would change that somewhat, or I look at that somewhat differently. I say that there's ways to do it and there's easier ways. And I'll give you an example. For most of my life, I was healthy. And then as I got into my early 40s, I developed a block, a 40% block in my left ventricle. I was born with it. I didn't know that, sat in my DNA and popped up when I was 40 years old. And so over the next decade, my health went bad. My weight went terrible. I was on 19 drugs a day. I was addicted to opioids for 25 years. I broke my back as a 19-year-old. And so I was just a mess. And I went and I did all of those things while still medicating myself, but getting heavier and heavier. And I found myself in 2022 ready to make a change. I lost 110 pounds and got back into the shape that I'm in now, which is the best shape of my life at 57 years old. It's 1,000 times easier to run a business, to live life, to work, to be a husband and a father and a friend at 200, I'm 6'4", so at 240 pounds than it is at well over 300 pounds. And so the analogy there is I did it being too heavy. It would have been a hell of a lot easier if I hadn't have been so heavy when I was doing so many of the things that I had done. So there's a way, it's not for everybody, but there's easier ways is the way that I would put it.
Yep. No, I would agree with that. It's interesting. I lost 72 pounds. And you know what? One of the things that I say is very similar to what you say, is that my back hurt me forever, right? My lower back and my knees. And the conventional wisdom, which it turns out is correct, says that if you lose weight, like your knees won't hurt as much and your back won't hurt as much. And I would have said, no, that's not true, because my back hurts and my knees hurt and they're always going to hurt.
Right.
And my mom had a bad back and my dad had a bad back. So therefore, ergo, I have a bad back. And then I lost the weight and I was like, oh my God, my knees don't hurt and my back doesn't hurt. And yes, it is easier to move.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I was like, huh, I guess conventional wisdom is right sometimes.
I had to go against the conventional thought, which was more drugs. I have a heart issue. I have 17 procedures on my spine over the course of my years. I couldn't walk 100 yards without sitting down twice. The first day, January 1 of 2022, as I started on this process of just limiting the number of calories. In my case, all I did was eat meat, 1,750 calories, and I lost 110 pounds in 8.5 months. But the first day I walked a quarter mile, it took me 24 minutes and I had to stop 3 times. I just couldn't walk, but I was going to quit the opioids. Everything I had tried, I was taking 19 pills at the time a day. Everything I had tried didn't work. And so I got to the point where I was like, I got to stop doing the things they're telling me and get something radical. Now, Jerry, you can't do a carnivore diet. You have heart issues. And I was like, I'm dying anyway. So I think I can eat meat to the tune of 1,750 calories a day and get my weight down. And if I get my weight down, then I'll re-ascertain, is this what I want to do long term? You know what happened, Kim? Just like you, I take 2 pills a day, 1 blood thinner because I have this block in my heart I can't get rid of, 1 blood thinner, and 1 drug that slows the heart down just a little bit. I choose to take those. That's it. After 19 pills, that's it. I've done 6 half marathons. I haven't taken a pain med now in going on 5 years. I've never been healthier in my life. It all started when I lost all of the weight. It was mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. It was its own extra body that I was carrying around. And when I got rid of it, it changed my whole outlook. I felt 35 years old, and that was before I put on 25, 30 pounds of muscle since then. I just couldn't be healthier if I tried. And I feel like the 25-year-old Jerry, not the dying 50-year-old Jerry.
Yeah, I agree. And I think relating it back to business and to entrepreneurship, I think I had the belief without even really articulating it for myself, I had the belief that I could never be thin.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not a thin person. I've never maintained a thin weight. I've been thin for about a minute in my life.
Right.
And then, so my thing was very similar to you. I just need to be healthier. So I started on this journey also like you before GLP-1s and I'm not saying, listen, you do whatever it is that's going to help you be healthy. I'm just saying it wasn't available. It just wasn't,
Right.
it wasn't an option. And what's really interesting is that as I started to lose the weight, I was like, wait a second, let's see what happens here. I'm
Yeah.
just going to keep going and see where I end up. And I ended up thin. And like you, I've kept the weight off for I don't know, like 4 years now,
About the
right?
same time. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is interesting is that I really sat in wonder for the longest time about, I thought that this was impossible for me and I'm thin. So what else do I think is not possible that actually is?
Yes. Right. The inverse is true for me, but it's the same point, which is I had achieved so much early on that when I was 51 years old, laying in the hospital right here in Williamson County, Tennessee, in the emergency room, dying from 100 mini heart attacks, down 4 pints of blood, weighing 300 plus pounds, miserable. I said, I'm not going out like this. And I know how to fight. I had forgotten how to fight. And it rolls up on you, and pretty soon a decade goes by. And I was like, no, I'm not. I got to go use all of these tools that I have that I had attained and put them to work again. So to your point, I needed to get back to that. It took me back to that kind of, don't listen to what people tell you. You're capable of so much.
Love that. All right. This is an interesting question. You'll tell me whether you think that you've answered this or you have another gem for us. What's one unconventional habit or mindset shift that's helped you grow your business?
What is one unconventional habit? We covered it, but again, from a mindset perspective, changing today what you'll change tomorrow is, or excuse me, changing today what you changed yesterday and change tomorrow what you changed today, as I said, is really important. And the other thing too, I would say, is that I taught my managers, and I managed this way through all those employees that I had, is that I wanted them to do what they wanted to do. And I was happy to give them all of the accolades and all of the approval as long as they did what I wanted them to do. So as long as the outcome was get them to do what you want them to do and let them think it's their idea. And being able to do that, setting your ego aside for the better of the company, I don't care if I'm wrong 100 times a day, as long as we're going in the right direction and what I want to get done gets done. So if the employees feel empowered because I gave them some idea that they may not have thought about, but then they take responsibility for it and run with it, and at the end come out and say to everybody, I came up with this, look what I did, I couldn't be happier. It's not important that you make all of the decisions. It's important that you guide that. And if you can set your ego aside, I always say I have a big ego, but I temper it with a sense of humility and a humbleness of where I come from. But that big ego can't be hurt. So I'm happy to give everybody all of the accolades as long as the thing is going the direction that it needs to go. And then conversely, when it goes bad, I take responsibility for it. It's served me very well.
I think there's a lot of wisdom, and I think it is unconventional to say, I will let any employee of mine that goes and runs with an idea and gets an outcome, they get credit. I take responsibility for anything that doesn't work or goes bad. That's pretty powerful,
Yeah.
right?
My mother said to me, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in my life. I was about 14 years old, and I was showing my mother how tough I was and how I wasn't going to do what she told me. I'm a man and I can do my own things. And she would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go work as a waitress. And one night I'm going to go out on a Friday night, and she said, be home by midnight. I'm going to worry about you. Of course, I'm 14 years old. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And out I went, and I came home at 2 o'clock, and she was still sitting in the same chair that she had said come home to. And she stood up and she didn't say a word, and she went to bed. Now I know she's got to be up in 3 hours to go to work, but she was up. And it really helped me understand looking at the world through someone else's eyes. I've never forgotten that story all these years later. And so from a management perspective, it's not quite the same, but the point of the story is that it really galvanized in my head to look at the world through someone else's eyes and not just my own eyes. And if I can do that, then I can help them be successful, which ultimately helps me be successful.
Right. Absolutely. I actually met with my team this morning, and I always get their input, right? Like basically what I said, okay, we're implementing this new strategy starting in the next month. What I need all of you to do is to really think through, like, how does this impact you and the work that you do? And we'll meet on individually on Monday and come back to me. What do you need from me? How can I support you, help you? And what challenges do you think you're going to have? And let's brainstorm those, right? Jerry, you can figure it all out, right? You could tell everybody what to do, but it really doesn't serve.
It doesn't scale. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. All right, last question. Many leaders secretly battle with imposter syndrome. So, a lack of confidence, like getting triggered by something. Two parts to that question. One, if it's going to come up for you, what are the circumstances where it's going to come up? And the second thing is, how do you bring yourself back to moving forward?
I love this question. I love the question of imposter syndrome. I love talking about imposter syndrome as much as I can. I suffer to this day from imposter syndrome. I had it before I sat down to do this. Is the third podcast I'm doing today. I have it every time before I come on a podcast. What am I going to say? Who's going to listen to me? I'm an idiot kid from the streets that doesn't know anything. Why would somebody want to hear what I have to say? But I want my message to get out, in particular, not only to the businesses that I'm doing and whatever value I can bring there, but also what's possible based on where I come from, and then give perspective that maybe is not out there quite as much as I think it should be. I can talk. I have a voice for this, right? I'm knowledgeable. I have the experience. I have the stories. I have the background. I have the memory, all of that. And it's gone the second the light comes on. As soon as you flipped on my screen, hey, there's Kim. I heard you on the phone the other day. Now I get to meet you. And it's all gone. And so then I'm constantly dealing with that imposter syndrome that tells me that I don't belong, which is really interesting because one of the great strengths I had is my ability to risk. I know what the bottom looks like. And in no world am I going anywhere near the bottom, which is back where I was. So it allows me a level of risk that other people may be uncomfortable taking on because I always assume I'm going to come out on top. And if I don't, I'm going to be further ahead than where I was simply from the lessons that I learned. So I have a really grounded way of looking at the world and moving up and success and taking risk and sacrificing. But having said that, in the middle of doing all of that, somebody will ask me a question as I'm doing it. And as I go to answer the question, the first thought in my head is, why in the hell does anybody want to hear what I have to say? I'm just a dumb kid from the streets. And so as I started the Kronos Group, my latest business, I've been doing more and more podcasts. I've been doing more and more videos. That's the world we live in today. And at first I was uncomfortable doing it because in the back of my head, again, that same voice is telling me, what in the hell are you doing? And so for me, repetitions have gotten rid of that to a large extent. I've never given a speech to anybody more than 50 or 60 people. So I said this year, I'm going to get somewhere, may not be on a stage, could be in a Grange Hall. I don't care. But I'm going to start getting my story and my message out. And I'm going to do that via speech. I'm not scared to get on a stage. I don't get stage fright. I'm supremely confident, but I have imposter syndrome. So what I do is I lean into it. I understand why I have it. I understand where it comes from. In a way, it keeps me humble. It reminds me of where I come from. So when I have that nagging, who in the hell wants to hear you say anything, I have to fight back and go, oh, I think a lot of people do. But at the same time, don't forget, why is that nagging you and why do you feel that way?
Yeah, I love that. I think really one thing I love about you and your story is that you're not afraid to look at your story, yourself, your stuff with curiosity, right?
Mm.
And also too, it's really interesting because you talked about actually really doing that with your businesses and business decisions and so forth, right? It's that ability to go back and look at stuff, not be so caught up in the what does it mean? And you can iterate, right? You
Yeah.
can iterate, but you can't if you're not willing to look at it.
Yeah, I think that self assessment, looking at one's self and also outside of oneself, is another superpower that we are missing. Men in particular, we hate being wrong. And so I say to all of the young guys that there are no stupid questions. There are just people too stupid to ask them. So I love a stupid
Mm.
question, but somebody's stupid question might be stupid in my head based on my vast experience. But then I take myself back to living with hookers at 17 years old, and I didn't know what a mortgage was. So I keep that perspective, and then I encourage them, ask dumb questions. I always say, look, there are things that I don't understand, particularly when it comes to this new world that we live in, SEO. I'm learning about SEO and AI and all of the parts that go into that and how that plays out, and schemas on my websites and all of these things that we're doing. And the Matt, who runs the company for me, is constantly educating me. And I'll say, well, we're going to have to get a crayon, right? Because I know you've explained this to me 3 times, but we're going to have to get a crayon because I'm not understanding it and you got to draw slower. And I think that is a superpower. And I've always been that way because, again, big ego, I think, but I'm humble and have some humility. And so it allows me to ask questions and let somebody else be right because I'm most worried about being wrong and I'm most worried about what I don't know. I'm not worried about what I know. I'm worried about what I don't know. But to come back around a little bit too, in that context and how that manifests itself with imposter syndrome, I think that all of these things are connected in a way that we're constantly full of doubt. And so it either manifests itself via doubt, or in my case, it manifests itself via imposter syndrome. But they are all excuses to not do the things that I think we should do. Somewhere in that little nugget of doubt, you know what you should go do, right? Somewhere in that little nugget of imposter syndrome is the reality that you're having it because you probably should go do that thing that makes you uncomfortable. And that is my key, is living in the uncomfortable. I never want to be comfortable. I love life. I'm 57 years old. I plan on living as long as I can, and I'm working till the last day. I love to work. I love life. I love business. I love problems. I love solving. I love success. I love my children. I love my wife. I love everything about what I'm doing. And so for me, though, if I get comfortable, the imposter syndrome gets worse, right? If I slow down, the doubt starts to creep in. If I'm going and I'm trying and I'm pushing, then I can keep that at bay a whole lot easier.
Yep. I love it. Love it. Let's go. All right.
Let's go. That's
Let's
right.
go. All right. Jerry, thank you so much. I really so appreciate you being so open about telling your story. And I know that this is of incredible value to me and to the listeners. So, again, really, thank you so much. You are talking to my guest, Jerry Brazie, Kronos Group. You can check him out. His information will be in the show notes. For me, this is Kim Miller-Hershon, Kim Miller-Hershon Coaching and Consulting. You have been listening to Unconventional Wisdom about conventional wisdom. If you want more gems, I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. That opt-in is in the show notes as well. And if you love the podcast, share it, tune into the next one, all that stuff. So go out there and be a better human.
Where cliches come to retire.